All right, I want to talk a little bit about managing risk in grazing systems. And if you have questions as we go along, please feel free to ask them. We're not on a real tight time schedule, so I don't feel quite as crunched. I got quite a few slides, but we're going to go through them pretty quick. We're going to talk first just one slide about the different types of risk, and I'm going to direct you to your proceedings. I wrote an article on the type of risk I'm going to talk about. But following my article in there is an article by a guy named Parsons from the Center for Grasslands in Nebraska. And he wrote a very nice article on the 5 types of risk associated with grass-based operations. And so I'll direct you to that. That's worth your half an hour that it's going to take to read that article sometime in the evening. So I'm going to describe 5 types of risk briefly. And then we're going to focus in on a type of production risk, and that's drought in grazing systems. Howard did a great job managing drought with irrigation systems, but that may not always be a viable option for us, depending on your operation. Michael did a great job discussing how he uses irrigation within his system because he had that infrastructure in place. And that's important. Sometimes it may not be feasible for you to invest in that infrastructure depending on your type of operation. So we're going to talk about agronomic management strategies for drought and grazing systems. And what I'm not going to do is lay out a specific drought management plan for your farm. Drought management plans are just like grazing systems. Every farm is going to be a little bit different depending on the resources that you have on your farm. And then Kenny's going to talk about pasture, range, and forage insurance. And I think that's going to be a pretty interesting discussion. And then finish up with a little bit on livestock risk management. Livestock risk protection insurance. And those are 2 tools that we can use to help manage risk in grazing systems. The important thing to remember about risk is that it's an inherent part of agricultural production, right? Always going to have risk. And what we need to do is try to mitigate that risk as much as we can. But it's important to realize there are no silver bullets. You're always going to have some risk in that production system. So the types of risk, the first type of risk that Parsons describes in that article is marketing risk. And that's pretty obvious. That's variability in prices. So say I'm in a stocker operation and I pay $1.60 for calves and I go to sell them and it's $1.10. That's a pretty big risk, right? But that's a part of the risk of the stocker calf operation. We can mitigate that risk somewhat through some of these insurance options that Kenny's going to talk about, but not completely. We have production risk, and that's production and output. Probably our single largest production risk is drought in grazing systems. We can do everything just right. We can subdivide our pastures, we can rotationally stock, but the one thing we can't manage is rainfall. Well, we can a little bit through good grazing management. We can make sure that when it does rain, it doesn't run off our farm. But we can't make it rain in most cases unless we've got an irrigation system like Howard. And so we're going to look a little bit at production risk. Legal risk, and that's risk from outside of your business. Also, we can call that institutional risk. So a legal risk might be an example if someone comes on your farm and breaks their leg and sues you. That's a legal risk. Institutional risk is something else that changes that we can't control. Like, say, for example, we impose tariffs on China, and now we can't export our beef to China because they imposed a tariff on us. That's something that was out of our control. That's an institutional type risk. Very difficult to manage. We can hardly predict what's going to happen there. And then we've got human risk, and that's risk from inside our organization. So someone gets hurt in an accident that works for us on the farm is a type of human risk. Or someone leaves that's a very integral part of our operation. That's another type of risk that we have in our operation. So, or you send your kids to college and all of a sudden there's nobody to do the work on the farm, right? So, and then financial risk, and that's risk associated with being heavily leveraged in operations. So if you owe a lot of money, that could impact how you manage your operation. Sometimes you can't be quite as quick to respond to changes in the environment that you're working within if you're heavily leveraged. So that's a type of risk within grazing operations. Parsons does a really good job at talking about these strategies for managing all types of risk in that article, and I'm going to direct you to that article for that discussion. But you can avoid it, you can reduce it, you can transfer it, you can increase capacity to bear it. A good example would be drought management. So if I'm worried about drought, I can increase the number of acres that I have per cow-calf unit. That's one way to increase that capacity to feed those animals during a dry period. And then we simply, at some point in time, you just have to accept that you're going to have some risk within that operation. Usually things that have no risk associated with them don't pay back very well. So, yeah. All right, so here's what I want to focus in on, and this is a risk that we experience almost yearly in Kentucky, and that's temporary drought within grazing systems. I went back and looked at 18 years of records. That's how long the Drought Monitor has been keeping drought records for the state of Kentucky. And 11 out of 18 years, somewhere in Kentucky, we experienced moderate drought stress. 7 of those 18 years, we experienced severe drought stress somewhere in Kentucky. And 5 of those 18 years, we experienced extreme drought somewhere in Kentucky. So drought is a part of our agricultural landscape. We're going to experience it sooner or later, no matter where you are in Kentucky. And what we need to do is think about is how are we going to manage that drought stress when it comes. And it's much better to have a plan in place. It's going to relieve a lot of emotional agony and financial agony in some cases if you have some type of drought management strategy in place. And so that's kind of what I'm going to talk about. And I'm going to throw out some ideas that you might think about including in the drought management plan. And the first one is to implement rotational stocking. And everybody's sitting here saying, now, what kind of drought management strategy is that, right? Well, it's important to realize what we do to the top of that plant impacts what's below the soil surface. And that's really, really important. The first thing people notice when they switch from a continuous to a rotational stocking system is that their pastures grow longer into a drought stress, and they come out of that drought stress faster. And that's due to that grazing management. It's due to resting those pastures. It's due to not grazing those pastures too closely. What we do to the top of that plant is going to impact what's below the soil. This plant here would be found in a continuously stocked pasture. So every time that top of that plant grows a little bit, that animal's right there and it nips it off, nips it off, nips it off. We're going to stop root growth in that pasture. We're going to have a smaller root system, and that pasture is going to be more susceptible to short-term drought stress during the summer months. That's really, really important to realize. This plant's rotationally stocked, so we graze it and then we rest it. And we let it accumulate top growth. We keep the root system growing. We keep the root system healthy. It's going to be able to explore a larger soil volume for water when things get dry. So controlled grazing or rotational stocking is just not a drought management strategy. It's probably one of the most important ones that you can implement on your farm for long-term drought management. We want to manage our pastures in a way that we're going to promote a healthy root system, and that's by preventing overgrazing and resting pastures between grazing events. We want to promote a positive carbohydrate status in our pasture plants. CHO is just an abbreviation for carbohydrates, and we do that by resting pastures between grazing events. Why are carbohydrates so important in a plant? That's what the plant uses as an energy source to grow with. So if we have a positive carbohydrate status or strong food reserves within that plant, when we encounter a drought stress, that plant can use that carbohydrates, those extra carbohydrates, to maintain itself during that drought stress. It can use it to regrow after that drought stress is finally over. And it also uses carbohydrates to adjust to that drought stress. We always think of a plant as going from a well-watered status to a drought stress status, like flipping a switch on and off. It doesn't happen like that. When a plant goes from well-watered to drought stress, it goes through a series of steps and allows that plant to adjust to that drought stress. One of the worst things we can do to pastures as we're going into a significant drought event is graze them all off to the ground. That's the worst possible thing we can do to a pasture. We want to go through a rotation. If we come back to our first pasture, it has not regrown, then we don't graze it. We park those animals somewhere and we feed a little bit of hay. And we'll talk about that as we go on here. So residual leaf area plays an important part when we talk about controlled grazing or rotational stocking. One, we leave some of that leaf area for a solar panel so that that plant can actively fix sunlight into carbohydrates through photosynthesis. We also leave some leaf area in that pasture because it modifies the microclimate to which those plants in the soil are exposed to, and that's pretty important. We can alter the temperature of that soil just by how much residual we leave in that pasture. If we leave residual, we're going to moderate the temperature of the soil. That's going to moderate the temperature of the crown of the plant. It's going to help it survive that drought stress, and it's going to reduce water loss from that soil compared to if we had it exposed and it was 120 or 130 degrees. And then by leaving some leaf area, we can actually have what happens in pastures that's very similar to thin animals that John Janot was talking about, compensatory growth in those pastures. So if we can go through a short-term drought stress, maintain that leaf in that pasture, that leaf is ready to grow as soon as it gets water from a drought-ending rain. And actually, those pastures can regrow very quickly. A lot of times, you're influenced by what your neighbors think. And somebody that's really doing a good job with managing their pastures gets around to that first pasture, still got grass in it, and it's getting dry, and they lay off of it, put their animals in a sacrifice area and feed some hay. Their neighbors are driving by looking, that guy's lost his mind. He's still got grass and he's feeding hay. But what we're doing is we're keeping from damaging that pasture so that it regrows after that drought stress ends. And so where your neighbor's pastures don't regrow because he hammered them into the ground during that drought stress, yours are going to respond to that rain very quickly after that drought stress is relieved. Every drought ends with rain, right? Sometimes it just takes a little bit longer than we'd like. Talk just a little bit about incorporating deep-rooted legumes into pastures. And Michael did a great job of pointing that out with alfalfa. Alfalfa is a great plant and one of my favorite perennial legumes. Dr. Lacefield called it the queen of the forages. Sometimes I think it's a little bit of a pouty princess because it is a great plant, but man, it likes a specific type of soil. It likes a deep, well-drained soil. It's got to have good fertility, right? It's got to have good P, good K, and it likes a pH of around 7. If you can meet those requirements, then it's a great choice to help give some drought tolerance in the grazing system. Are all of our pastures going to meet those requirements? Probably not. I see Connor over there shaking his head. He's on reclaimed mine land. Probably not a great place for alfalfa to grow. But it can be a good legume to incorporate into a system. And if you want to eliminate or mitigate bloat with alfalfa, just putting a little grass with it is a great way to mitigate that bloat. Red clover has taproot structure. It's not as strong as alfalfa, but it can give us some drought tolerance in grazing systems. The big benefits of red clover is it's easily established in pastures. It's very shade tolerant. It frost seeds very well into grass pastures. That means we come in February, we graze our pastures off close, we broadcast that red clover on, and then I like to leave the animals on after we broadcast it because they're going to suppress that sod even more if you leave them on that field and feed a little bit of hay on it. Gives the red clover a chance to germinate and come up and produce a viable seedling in that stand. Probably one of our best adapted and most important pasture legumes in Kentucky. Now the thing to remember about red clover is longevity is not as good as alfalfa. It's going to last 2 or 3 years at the most. If we used improved varieties, Dr. Henning did a lot of work with common versus improved varieties, and you get about a year longer out of an improved variety of red clover. So that red clover that you bid on in the silent auction, good choice to include in the grazing system. Sericia Lespedeza, good or bad? I get one thing, well, from Ken, he's a small ruminant guy, right? So small ruminant guys tend to love Sericia Lespedeza. You know, it's got its pluses and it's got its minuses, right? So we commonly find it where we had reclaimed mine land or uh, road cuts, somewhere where the soil is not ideal. It's well adapted to lower fertility and lower pH. And where other plants can't kind of get a hold there, Sericia Lespedeza can. And for that reason, it can fit lower fertility situations pretty well. Having said that, it does respond to improved fertility too. We did a nice study at Virginia Tech where we improved soil fertility and really increased Sericia Lespedeza annual production. Got poor seedling vigor, so if you're going to try to establish it, you need to do it by itself rather than in a mixture. And then it needs to be really rotationally stocked. It's kind of like alfalfa. It needs to be grazed and then rested. Probably its biggest benefit is drought tolerance. It's going to be green and growing when everything else is dead. And you can moan and complain that it's not that palatable and it's got high tannins in it, but it's going to give those animals something to graze during those dry periods. That was really driven home to me in 2002 when I was in Virginia. That summer was the driest I've ever seen it, 18 inches behind in rainfall. Tall fescue was brown and crunchy underneath your feet. Sericia Lespedeza was still green. So it's got tremendous drought tolerance. If you're going to plant some, then use AU Grazer. It's an approved variety. It's got finer stems selected under grazing in moderate levels of tannins. I probably missed the most important thing. It's got some natural worming properties that are important for small ruminants and grazing systems. The what? The tannins, yeah. So this is not really a deep-rooted legume, but it is a warm season annual legume that we've kind of forgotten about in grazing systems. They can give us some summer grazing. And there's reasons we don't use it as much anymore. And the biggest reason is that we have better access to lime and fertilizer. And in our improved cool season legumes like red and white clover are just more productive than annual Lespedeza. But we can use this, especially on renting ground where we don't have the long-term lease that will allow us to improve soil fertility. There's two types, Kobe and a Korean. Generally, we recommend Korean. It's a little bit more productive. We can frost seed it with a little bit of clover in late winter, 10 to 15 pounds per acre. It'll come up and produce some growth during the summer months. And again, it has some levels of tannins, not as much as Sericia Lespedeza. So another alternative or another mechanism that we can use to mitigate drought stress is to incorporate some warm season grasses into grazing systems. This is just a little bit of a complex graph. Just replace this mumbo jumbo here with photosynthetic rate. That's what that is. And look over here on the right side here at leaf temperature is what I want you to notice. So we have a C3 grass, that's a cool season grass. We've got a C4 grass, and then alfalfa kind of behaves as an intermediate species. So this is what happens as leaf temperature increases, and this is Celsius. So 20 degrees Celsius is about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. And so as leaf temperature increases, the photosynthetic rate increases in cool season grasses up to about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So at 70 degrees Fahrenheit, we're getting optimum photosynthetic rates of cool season grasses. Look at what happens as we raise that temperature past 70 degrees Fahrenheit. We're kind of steady here for about 10 or 15 degrees, and then we very quickly decrease the photosynthetic rate in cool season grasses as we get past that 70 to 80 degree mark. When we get up to 90 to 100 degrees, we can water cool season grasses like perennial ryegrass, but they're not productive because the photosynthetic rate is so low. There's a side reaction called photorespiration that takes place in cool season grasses. And that's past today's discussion. What I want you to notice is the C4 grass, though. We increase leaf temperature, and we're not even hitting peak photosynthesis until we get to 90 degrees. This is important for us to realize, especially in the transition zone. If we want something that's going to be productive in the summertime, that's going to respond not only to irrigation but to rainfall, a little bit of rainfall in the summer months, we want a warm season grass in our grazing system. And that's the reason we want to include some type of warm season grass. And I'm just going to flip through a couple, but not discuss them in a lot of detail because we don't have a lot of time here. So this is the forage growth curves. If we look at our cool season grasses, traditionally bluegrass, orchard grass, tall fescue at the top, hump of growth in the spring when it's nice and cool, hump of growth in the fall when things cool off again. Not much going on during the summer months. That's when that growth is limited by temperature. A lot of times people think I put a little water on that and it'll grow. It'll grow a little bit, but you're not going to be getting optimum growth because growth is temperature limited during the summer months. Now on the bottom here we see our warm season grasses. And our warm season grasses have all that growth packed right into the middle of the summer months. And that's the reason that we want to irrigate a warm season grass rather than a cool season grass during the summer months. So I'm not going to say a lot about this, but we have our more traditional summer annual grasses that can be part of a grazing system. They include things like pearl millet and sorghum Sudan grass or Sudan grass. They can be highly productive during the summer months. How do they fit into grazing systems here? Do we want to have a grazing system based on just annuals? Probably not. We're really in the fescue belt. Fescue does well here. We need to think about having a strong perennial forage base and then supplementing that forage base with annuals. In the way a summer annual and a winter annual can fit into a grazing system is during a renovation sequence is a good place for it. So we get in this mindset that we're going to plant a pasture and it's going to last forever, and that's not really how it works. What we want to do is plant a pasture and we want to use it until it becomes thin, and then we'll come in with an annual. We'll interseed that annual in there, clean up the weeds for a cycle of cool and warm season annuals, and then we'll come back in and plant a perennial forage, cool season forage, like improved tall fescue in the fall. Cool season forages, it's ideal to plant them in the fall rather than the spring to avoid competition from warm season annual weeds during establishment. Talked a little bit about crabgrass already, and I'm not going to go through a lot of detail on this, but this can be a good warm season annual grass in grazing systems. Annual performance can be quite good on it. Dalrymple had decades of data summarized in a publication. It's probably in that one on the table there, where he looked at stocker calf performance on crabgrass and they were not supplemented with anything. It was just straight crabgrass. On what he called a medium quality crabgrass, he would get about 1.75 pounds to 2 pounds a day average daily gains. So it can be quite nutritious during the summer months. The nice thing about crabgrass is there's no prussic acid like a sorghum Sudan grass. And it tends to be higher in forage quality than Bermuda grass. There's a lot of Bermuda grass as we move west from here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Generally speaking, crabgrass is going to have higher animal performance. It really needs to be grown in conjunction with the winter annual. So the Marshall annual ryegrass that Michael was showing is the perfect fit for that. We can come in, plant ryegrass a little bit earlier than this in the fall or late summer, and use that for winter and then mostly spring grazing. And then as it starts to play out in the late spring, early summer, the crabgrass kind of comes back on, and we can stimulate that stand with just a little bit of soil scratching like Debbie was describing earlier. So we don't want to do deep tillage, but just getting that seed scratched into the soil surface. And then Bermuda grass, and Bermuda grass is well adapted to Kentucky. I was quite surprised when I came 2 years ago at how much Bermuda grass there is in the western part of the state. Very, very well adapted. We had a field day in Graves County about a month ago, and there was 2 fields that were just inundated with Bermuda grass. And she didn't plant it. It just occurred naturally in those pastures. Probably a factor of her management. She probably used those pastures a little harder in the summertime, and it tended to shift the botanical composition of those pastures towards the Bermuda grass. but they were meeting her summer forage needs in her cow-calf system. Talk a little bit about irrigating pastures, and I think irrigation can be an important tool, but it's going to depend on the type of operation you have and existing infrastructure of how well it works. So there's no question that it's going to increase pasture growth during the summer months, and it can be a significant increase, especially if you're using it coupled with warm season grasses. The big question is whether you can afford to install the infrastructure. You need a water source, and you need a way to irrigate that water source. If you've got an old tobacco farm and you've already got the equipment on it and you've got the water source, it may make sense to use it as a drought a strategy for mitigating droughts during the summer months. If you have to make all those investments up front for a beef cow operation, the economics can be a little dicey. Where it may make sense is in a dairy grazing operation where you're really counting on that forage, having a consistent forage supply. So again, we already talked about this, but during the summer, warm season grasses are what you really need to be irrigating because they're more efficient at using water. They'll produce about twice as much dry matter per unit of water used compared with the cool season grass during the summer months. And then Howard did a nice job showing this technology. You can watch the videos on the internet. This is a K-line system. I don't know if that's what you all have. Yeah. And this can work, but it's always easier in those videos than in the real world, right? So irrigation's not easy. If you've never irrigated pastures before, not a lot of fun. You can spend a considerable amount of time irrigating pastures. And the videos are quick. It looks like they can move all these pasture pods in 30 seconds, right? In the video, Howard was telling me it takes a little bit longer to do that than the video shows. So no silver bullet there, guys. Feed conserved forage. This may be a good drought mitigation strategy. So we've got hay, and when we get into a drought, we feed that hay. Not rocket science and pretty simple to implement, but you've got to be ready with that conserved forage. So and we talked about today, we tell you to strive to reduce the amount of conserved forage in your system. That doesn't mean you don't need conserved forage. It just means that you need to think about how you can reduce your dependency on it when you can. We're always going to need some for that drought and that flood period and that bad winter storm that we have. But we really want to try to get it down to about 60 days of feeding conserved forage. And the question is always, do you buy it or do you make it? God, I know people love machinery, and I like a good new tractor too, but man, they're expensive. I grew up on a farm, and I never even knew they made new equipment because we always had old tractors, and I get so frustrated. Why doesn't my dad just buy a good tractor that would start when you wanted to use it? But there's a reason for that. They're expensive, right? So so you have to think about that. I used the Virginia Tech budget for some different hays, and I just kind of put a number with these hays, and Kenny's estimate was a little cheaper than mine. And really, to be honest with you, the cost of producing hay can be all over the board. Can go anywhere from $80 to $150. If you go out and you buy a new John Deere baler and a tractor and spear and rake and so forth, and you don't have a lot of acreage to run that over, got 40 cows, you're going to be looking at $150 a ton probably for that hay. But if you're honest with yourself and you throw a little labor in, because most of the time we don't pay ourselves, right? But if you throw a little labor cost in and you throw some land cost in there too, you're going to be looking at about $100 a ton for hay. It's a pretty honest estimate. If you've never figured out how much your hay's costing you, I'd challenge you to just sit down one night and put a pencil to it and see what you're spending on making that hay. And then go to the internet and see what people are selling hay for. Now this isn't dairy quality hay by any means, but there's a lot of hay sold for less than it costs to make in Western Kentucky. And that's a real opportunity for you. If you have an idea of how much hay costs and your neighbor doesn't, I'm not saying take advantage of your neighbor, but if he's offering that hay for sale at below cost, then there's no reason that you shouldn't consider buying it. And you got to be careful. I mean, you can get some low quality hay. I've never seen a hay advertisement that says, I've got a lot of crappy hay and I want to sell it to you. It's always good quality mixed hay, you know. So so you just have to be careful. And then weeds are also a consideration. You can bring weed seed in. So just be careful, find a reliable hay source. Buy the hay when there's a lot of hay available. The worst time to buy hay for a drought mitigation strategy is when? During the drought. You hit it right on the head. So you want to buy it early and store it under cover. Hay doesn't go bad. If it's off under cover and off the ground, hay will last for decades in a barn. You're going to lose some vitamins. Just feed a good mineral pack with it that includes vitamins. The key to using this successfully as a drought mitigation strategy is to feed that hay before you damage your pastures. So that means you get around your rotation, there's no grass or it's not ready to graze in that first paddock. You just park them in the weakest paddock that you have and you start to feed some hay. And you're going to do that before you've grazed everything into the ground, and that's going to minimize damage from that drought in a grazing system. Guys, normally a drought will not kill a well-adapted cool season grass species. What kills a well-adapted grass species is overgrazing and poor fertility management prior to that drought. The drought is kind of like the straw that breaks the camel's back. You want to feed before cattle lose condition, and then feed in your weakest paddock and just accept that you're going to damage that paddock and it's going to need to be reseeded. So what you're doing is just limiting the amount of acreage that's damaged during that drought to one pasture. All right, this is kind of a little bit out of the box, and this is a little bit different thinking, but sometimes, and we talked a lot about stockpiling for winter grazing, but sometimes we can stockpile pastures for summer grazing too. So what we do is we just simply remove a pasture from the rotation in the spring. So instead of cutting hay, we just take it out and we let biomass accumulate. And it's going to be lower in forage quality. But what kind of forage quality do you need for a beef cow, especially if she's dry? Not too much. And you just accept that lower forage quality, and that accumulated biomass kind of gets you through that drought period or that short-term drought period during the summer months. Is this ideal for a dairy situation? No, but for an old brood cow, this could be a strategy that you can easily implement on most farms in the transition zone. So we did a little study when I was at Virginia Tech where we either came in mid-May and we clipped a pasture, or we didn't clip a pasture and we applied 60 pounds of nitrogen in mid-May and just allowed that growth to accumulate. And then we came in August when we stocked it with calves and measured average daily gain. And what we found is where we clipped the pastures at, very consistent results from year to year, where we clipped the pastures at, we were gaining in August on this tall fescue pasture 1.4 pounds a day. Not lighting the world on fire, but it's pretty good nutrition to get 1.5 pounds a day. Where we didn't clip the pasture at, we got lower average daily gain as you would expect in those calves. The quality was lower, there's more stems there, less green growth. Now, the caveat is that these pastures that we use were a novel endophyte tall fescue. So that's pretty important. We tend to like to avoid tall Kentucky 31 during the summer months because of tall fescue toxicosis. Can you do this with Kentucky 31? You could, but animal performance is going to be hurt, especially during the summer months when animals are more prone to heat stress. And if you guys didn't get a chance to look at the USDA poster over there, take a look at that before you go. There's a picture, Jimmy, if you could show them that picture of those blood vessels on there. I mean, it is absolutely eye-opening what the ergot alkaloids do to the vascular system of the animal when you look at that photograph. All right, we can utilize commodities to extend pasture and hay during a drought stress. We need to think about when we think about using commodities as a mitigation strategy, Where are we going to buy them at? How much do we have to buy at one time to get a good price on them? How are we going to transport them? Where are we going to store them at? And then how are we going to handle them and feed them? Commodities sound real good on paper, but when you start thinking about all the logistical challenges, sometimes they're not as good of an option as you think. And then you always need to price what your least cost option is. Important thing to remember about commodities is there's some really strange mineral imbalances in certain commodities, and so if you haven't fed that commodity, you want to make sure that you get with somebody that knows what they're doing, an animal scientist, an extension animal scientist, a veterinarian, or a nutritionist that can help you make sure that you're not going to make a ration that's going to really have a negative impact on your animals. And then the keys to successfully using is availability during a drought. So they've got to be available, and you've got to be able to store and feed those commodities. Another mitigation strategy is stocking for a drought. So what I mean by that is that we lower our stocking rate so that when a drought does come, we have that capacity to bear that drought. If we stock at too high of a rate, everybody knows that the whole system kind of falls apart, right? So animal performance tends to be lower, and agronomic performance or pasture production tends to be lower. If we stock at too low of a rate, we decrease our returns. No better way to lose money in the cow-calf business than stock at too low of a rate. And that's the reason I don't really like this strategy. I think we need to be stocking for an average year. And because we're going to have a significant opportunity cost when we stock too low. So most years we won't be optimizing our production or profit if we're stocked too low. So what's the ideal stocking rate? Of course it depends, but generally speaking, somewhere between 2 and 3 acres per cow-calf unit is going to be a pretty sustainable stocking rate for this part of the country. Early weaning. So one thing we can do if we get into a bad drought is remove the calf from the cow. And I talked to Kevin Laurent yesterday about this, and he said he'd like to at least see the calves be 300 pounds before we take them off the cow. Or how old, Kevin? 3 to 4 months? 4 months is ideal. And this is going to do 2 things. It's going to reduce the number of animal units you have per acre, and it's also going to reduce nutrient requirements of the cow. And it pretty significantly. I'll show you in a minute. It can improve cow condition. If cows are starting to get pulled down because of the drought, removing those animals are going to help maintain that condition on those animals. And there's a lot here, but what I want you to focus on is this last line. When we pull those calves off, we reduce the dry matter requirement of those cows by 20%. We reduce the total digestible nutrients or the energy requirements by 22%, and we reduce the protein requirements by 36%. Just by removing that calf. So this can be a viable strategy. Not ideal, but sometimes decisions we have to make during a drought are not always ideal. Destock. This is probably the least popular option. And so sometimes we can sell the whole herd, but nobody wants to do that, and it's not ideal. But it may be a good time to get rid of those animals that don't really fit into your system. Maybe they've got some feet problems or other problems, and you've been letting them kind of hang around because you like them. And it may be a good time to get rid of them. Maybe it doesn't fit your system. Maybe you've got a cow that's 1,700 pounds. She probably just needs to go away, and a drought would be a good time to get rid of her and get a cow that kind of fits your system a little bit better. Make decisions on long-term records, and if you're going to use this, don't wait until everybody's selling their cows, right? That's the worst time to sell anything. We should be buying stuff when everybody's selling cows, right? Do it before the market gets flooded. So just closing thoughts. Regardless of what strategy you choose or what combination of strategies, be ready to implement those on a timely basis. So don't wait till your pastures are damaged. You can do it on days without rain, available pasture, days on hay, changing body condition, but somehow you got to have a benchmark for implementing your drought management plan. Feed hay on pastures before they're damaged and cows lose condition, And planning for drought can reduce both economic and emotional impact. There's not a lot of worse feelings than having a bunch of cows that you don't know how you're going to feed them during a drought. So a little planning ahead of time can really reduce that emotional impact. Never hurts to ask the good Lord for a little bit of rain, right? All right, Kenny, you're going to talk a little bit about a couple of drought management insurance tools. Yep.
I'm going to throw this out, but I think the risk of having too much rain raises the risk of drought.
That's a good point. You can have too much rain, but I promised myself in 2002, we had a drought in Virginia. I've never seen anything like it. We were 18 inches behind an annual rainfall, and I said, I'll never complain about too much rain again. Because you'll get some growth with too much rain, but no growth with no rain.
But the point is, you got to have a plan in place for that.
Right. That's a good point, Jesse, is you need to be able to mitigate damage to pastures during overly wet periods also.
All right, so I'm going to try and cover both PRF insurance and LRP insurance both in about 10 minutes. If I were doing this in a typical county program type setting, I would spend about 30 minutes on PRF and about 30 minutes on PRF and about 45 on LRP. So I'm very much going to hit the highlights. I'm going to guess you've all heard of PRF insurance at this point. There's quite a few folks trying to sell it across the state. It's a product that I do generally like, and we'll talk about some of the good and the bad. But when you buy PRF insurance, understand first and foremost, you're buying an insurance product. Okay, it's an index insurance that pays you for less than normal rainfall. Okay, and normal rainfall, as it applies to PRF, is defined as average rainfall going back to 1948. Okay, over a quarter latitude by quarter longitude block. Okay, so at the equator, that's roughly 17 miles by 17 miles. I'm not real good at math, but it's going to be something closer to 13 or 14 by 13 or 14 here in Kentucky. Okay, and it's going to use the closest 4 weather stations to extrapolate an average rainfall for that grid. Okay, so this is just kind of an example of some grids. The county here that you kind of see outlined in blue just happens to be Muhlenberg County. Okay, but it gives you an idea of how these might lay out. Depending on how the grids lay, each county is going to have anywhere between 4 and 8 of these grids are going to cover the county for the most part. Okay, you can insure as little as 70%, as much as 90% of normal rainfall. Okay, if you chose 90% coverage, for example, the maximum, you would get an indemnity. If you got less than 90% of normal rainfall during that period of time, and you cover this in 2-month blocks. Okay, so it's calendar year basis. You have to pick at least 2 2-month periods to cover. Okay, so for example, if I wanted to, I could cover June and July, August and September. I could cover April, May, June, July, August, September if I wanted to. I could cover evenly across all 12 months if I wanted to, but I've got to cover at least 2-month periods. I can't put any more than 60% of my value in any 2-month period. I can't double cover. Okay, if the 3 months you were most worried about were June, July, and August, I can't cover June, July, then July, August. Okay, I have to cover 2-month periods that don't overlap. I would probably do this if it were me, right? Okay, just can't do it. Now, I wanted to keep this as simple as I could, but this is the one case I'm going to have to throw a little bit of numbers at you to make this make some sense. Okay, so I went back to last year. I went to RMA's website, looked at their tool, and I looked at, okay, what would it actually have cost me to cover 100 acres of ground, and I chose that county in West Kentucky, Muhlenberg County. Okay, so this will be very close to what you would see in this area. I chose 90% coverage. Okay, every county has a base value for grazing acres and a base value for hay acres. Okay, I just chose the base value of, in this case, it was $74.80. So roughly, $70 to $85 kind of rule of thumb on pasture ground. You can scale this up or scale this down. I just didn't. Okay, I kept it at $64.80. Now, to keep it simple, I chose the 2-month periods. I chose June, July, August, September, and I put 50% of my coverage in both. The best way to think about this is like this. Okay, I've got $74.80 of value per acre, okay? When I split that in two at 50-50, okay, I put half of that in the June-July couplet and half in the August-September couplet. So in other words, I've taken that and I've now got $37.40 of value per acre in each of those two-month periods. Does that make sense? It's the best way to think about it, okay? In terms of cost, you're going to pay a $30 administrative fee, okay, per county, per crop. So if you were covering both pasture and hay, you'd pay it twice. Just pasture, pay it once. But in this particular case, based on those 2 months and that particular grid, out of pocket I would have paid $4.38 per acre, okay, after the subsidy, what my cost would be. So 100 acres, $438, pay $30 administrative fee. I would have had a bill, or I would have had a liability to pay in premium of $468. Okay. Now fast forward, we're now in season where the coverage is. Two very simple examples. Okay. Let's say that June-July couplet rainfall was 80% of normal. So what this means is maybe normal was 10 inches for that 2 month period, and I got 8 inches. Okay. I was 80% of normal. I chose 90% coverage, okay? I got 80% actual, okay? I was 10% below my coverage. My indemnity for that couplet would be 10% of the value I had in there, okay? So 10% of that $37.40, my indemnity per acre would have been $3.74. Everybody follow that? Okay, same exact thing. Let's say August, September was 40% below normal. Okay, now I'm 30% below my coverage level. My indemnity for that period would be 30% of that $37.40, $11.22. Now, obviously, I stacked the cards here to teach an example. Okay, you know, we've got an indemnity in both cases. All right, but based on if that were to happen, I would have gotten indemnity in the amount of $1,496. I had a liability on my premium of $468. I would have netted over $1,000 on the 100 acres. Okay, if I got above normal rainfall on both couplets, what would have been my net insurance cost? Well, I would have been out $468, right? Okay, it's insurance. Okay, it's only going to pay me if I get an indemnity, obviously. Okay, that's the way that it works. There are some really good materials on RMA's website. Okay. I've done probably half a dozen, maybe to 10 of these across the state. So I've done some work with it at kind of county and regional type meetings. This is kind of a quick hitter here today. There's some really good fact sheets, questions, the extra decision tool right here. Sign up ends November 15th. So one reason we wanted to mention that at this time was that if you're interested in doing this, okay, sign up for calendar year 2019 goes through November 15th of this year. Okay. My quick thoughts on it. It is truly a single peril insurance product. What is the single peril that it covers? Just drought, right? Just inadequate rainfall. Okay? It does not cover too much rainfall, which is also a problem sometimes. Okay? It also does not deal with timing issues. If I cover June and July as one of my couplets, okay, and 10 inches is normal, and I get 10 inches the first week, right, and then I'm dry the next 7, over that 2 month period, we were normal. Okay, we all know that's not that's a recipe for problems, though. So be aware of how that works. I like it because, one, it's a relatively inexpensive way to get some moisture coverage, and I do think it is. Okay, it's not real expensive, and it does give you some protection against drought. From a risk perspective, I tell people cover the months you're most worried about rainfall. Okay, so if I'm a grazer, that's probably going to be my summer months. Okay. If I'm a hay producer, it might be more the spring and the fall months. I don't know. Okay, but whatever it is that you're most worried about, I would cover those months. The second reason that I like it is because it's fairly heavily subsidized. Okay, in fact, it's one of the few insurance products we've had available to cattle producers and grazers, okay, that has the kind of premium subsidy that we see on the crop insurance type products. Okay, so over time, do be aware, because of that subsidy, okay, you should receive more in indemnity than you pay in premium. Okay, and I'm just telling you that up front. It's subsidized pretty heavily. Okay, keep that in the back of your mind. Not the best picture to see of it right there. Okay, my daughter took this of me in mid-July of this year. Okay, you can see I've got grass up there, you know, almost to my waist. Right now, I was talking with Sam earlier, I guess before the break maybe, okay? And you said you actually got a payment or an indemnity in 2018 down in this area, okay? I would not have gotten anywhere I live, okay? It's been a phenomenal past year for us. We've had rain when we've needed it, okay? We've had almost too much rain in cases, okay? My point being, I would not have needed LRP insurance. I'm sorry, yeah, I would not have needed, sorry, too many acronyms. I would not have needed PRF insurance in 2018, okay? Look at my summer forage, okay? But it would have given me some compensation in a bad year when I might have been short on moisture, okay? So because it's fairly inexpensive and subsidized, and because over time it should pay out, I would encourage you to think about it. I like the product reasonably well. No, of course not. No. I'm not saying I wouldn't buy it, but it's a whole lot more attractive when you're paying half the premium cost. Good question. LRP insurance is another pseudo single peril insurance, okay? You're buying an insurance policy that pays you an indemnity if the CME feeder cattle index is below a threshold you choose on a specified ending date, okay? Now I'm skipping a lot of details here. The CME feeder cattle index is a 7-day weighted average of feeder cattle prices out west, okay, in 12 major cattle producing states, okay? So if the feeder cattle market had a pulse, this is it, okay? So you're buying an insurance policy that pays you, okay, effectively if that index level drops. The thought being, if the value of those feeder cattle out west drops, what should happen to the value of our feeder cattle here? They should drop too. Okay, another index type insurance product. If any of you have fooled with any commodity options, okay, it is very similar to a put option. You're essentially buying a subsidized put option, a much smaller subsidy, but a subsidized put option. It's also scalable, okay? If you ever looked at put options, you're locked into these 50,000 pound quantities in the contracts, okay? You can buy LRP insurance on 10, 15, 20 head. The main reason that I like LRP insurance is I can buy it if I'm a small operator. So I do like LRP insurance. One of the most frustrating things about it, okay, because the actual coverage levels and premiums are based on actual CME option trades, I can only buy it after trading hours and before trading hours, okay, which means late afternoon and early morning here in the Central Time Zone, very early morning Central Time Zone. Okay, so be aware that that is a problem. You're going to mostly be working with your agents sometime after afternoon, okay, mid-afternoon and later to do this. Simple hypothetical scenario, okay? This is what you might encounter though. So you can buy coverage as close as 90 days out, okay, or well 13 weeks out. Okay, so 13 weeks out, and then it's every 4 weeks after that. So 13, 17, 21, and so on. So for example, if I had 8 weights to sell in February, I might buy an LRP insurance product with an ending date of February 15th. Okay? If this was February 15th, the next ending date would be 28 days later, okay, which would put it what, March 15th. When I look at that, okay, the expected ending value for that contract might be 148, and that's roughly based on futures prices today. Okay? So spring contracts are in the upper 140s. Maybe I could buy 3 policies that day. Okay, one might be a coverage level at 148, which means it's right at the money. Okay, if the market drops at all, I'm covered. That's like a 0 deductible insurance policy, right? I'm covered immediately. That might cost me $5 a hundredweight, and on 850 pound steers, folks, that's 42, 43 bucks a head, a fair amount of money. Okay, I might self-insure a little bit. By a $140 coverage level, I've got to self-insure $8. Do you see that? That means the first $8 drop in the market I've kind of got to eat. Then my insurance kicks in. That's going to be cheaper. That might cost me something like $3 a hundred. That's going to be about $25, $26 a head. If I want to self-insure a little bit more, I might buy something like a 136, okay? And that might cost me $2 a hundredweight. Again, that's only going to cost me about 17 bucks a head, but what's also true, now I've got to self-insure the first $12 in market drop. Okay, so these numbers are going to change with the market. Okay, but you know, watching it like I have, they're not bad estimates on what you might pay for coverage levels, you know, roughly those distances out of the money. So if I chose that 140 coverage level and I bought that, and again, the expected ending value is 148. I'm covered at 140. I'm going to self-insure the first $8. I'm going to write a check for $25.50 per head on my cattle. Then we see what happens in February. There's three things that can happen. Okay, understand if prices go up. First of all, prices go up, market goes up, Kentucky market goes up, CME index goes up. Okay, I don't get an indemnity. I'm out to $25.50. Okay, but this is the best case scenario, right? In this case, the cattle market goes up. Yeah, I wasted some money on premium. I do it every year on my several insurance products. Okay, that happens. Best case scenario. Second scenario, maybe the market falls just a little bit. Okay, so expected ending value was 148. I bought 140 coverage. What if it goes to 142? Okay, the market's fallen some. It's not fallen enough to trigger my indemnity, right? But I probably sell my cattle for a little bit less, and I'm still at the premium. Okay, this is like having a $1,000 deductible on your car insurance, having a fender bender, right? It happens. Okay, I was insured. The loss wasn't enough for my insurance to actually kick in. That's a possibility. Okay. Third possibility, though, the market falls quite a bit. Okay, maybe that market drops $20 a hundred. Okay, if feeder cattle prices out west drop $20 a hundred, they do here in Kentucky too, most likely. If that's the case, my indemnity kicks in. Okay, my insurance pays off. I'm glad I get a check on the insurance, but what's true about this scenario? It's really a worst case, right? This isn't what I don't want to happen. Best case scenario is I buy the insurance and don't need it, right? I don't want to buy PRF and have a drought. I don't want to buy LRP and see the market tank, okay? But if those two things happen, I'm going to be glad I've got the insurance in place. So I tell producers, first of all, think about how much risk you can bear, okay? If you can self-insure major market swings and don't want to buy insurance, no problem. Your business, okay? I've got folks I work with that are in that situation. That's perfectly fine. I also work with folks who are highly leveraged, okay, who are young, who have farm payments and bank loans, and they cannot afford to self-insure these major market drops, okay? And they have to do something to insure themselves against price risk. It might be LRP, it might be contracting, it might be futures and options, okay? But know what tools are out there and at your disposal. You want to choose an ending date as close when you sell the cattle as possible, okay? The way the policies are written, if you sell those cattle 30 days before the ending date, you void the policy, okay? Understand, though, any time you sell after is okay, but the indemnity is figured on the ending date, okay? So maybe you keep these cattle till mid-March, okay? Maybe the market was in good shape mid-February, you don't get indemnity, and the market drops after that, okay? Those kind of things happen. You're self-insured past the ending date. Last point I'll make is this one. Okay, you can imagine when I get the most questions and the most requests to come out and do programs about price risk management. The answer is the winter after the market drops, right? Okay, but understand that you cannot resurrect good prices. Okay, you can't, right? Okay, if the market is expected to stink, the best you can do through a futures-based mechanism is lock in a price that stinks. Do you understand that? It's an important concept. Okay, so you don't manage risk from looking behind, you manage risk looking forward. Okay, so you've got to look for opportunities and move on them when they're there. Okay, you cannot resurrect good prices. I've got a publication on LRP insurance. I did quite a bit of this kind of stuff back probably like 2010 to 2013. UT, my counterpart there, has got a really good publication, and RMA's website's also got several good things about LRP insurance. Sorry for the flyby, but we were kind of doing that pretty quick, and we want to give you a quick header on those. So if you have questions, let me know. There's some resources that I mentioned that are available to you. I'm happy to visit with you, and I will answer a couple questions if you have them. Thanks for having me again. Let me think. So to answer your question, we had LRP. We've had futures and options in the past on the farm. We had LRP, you have this, Chris. We had LRP